Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. I'm reminded of that old saying that everything's bigger in Texas, especially the stupidity and the racism. Before we dive into this morning's briefing, I just want to say from the outset that for the people, these smart, dumb Negroes, who always want to chime in on stories like this, you can keep your stupid comments to yourself. What I mean by that is, you got these people who will say, well, why are we talking about this, brother? We got two white folks and ain't no black folks involved here. These are the same morons who said that Kyle Rittenhouse's double homicide that he committed, the mass shooting he was responsible for, that had nothing to do with black people. Listen up, stupid. If you happen to have some white people who are moved by conscience, by genuine conscience, that they want to go ahead and stand against white supremacy, am I supposed to be mad at them? Am I supposed to say that it does not matter if some white supremacist like Rittenhouse or this Daniel Perry character comes along and kills them, and does it because those people got between the white supremacist and us? Kyle Rittenhouse had premeditated that mass shooting that he carried out. I did an entire video essay about it, breaking it down point by point. There was a video of him watching some people who were protesting or otherwise folks who were involved in some sort of civil disturbance. And he was sitting there in the car saying, I wish I had my gun with me. Next thing you know, he goes to Kenosha looking for someone to shoot. And this Daniel Perry character down there in Texas, this Jewish white supremacist, the exact same thing. He was posting all sorts of racist messages on his social media. That's part of what got him convicted. He admitted that he was a racist. Not that we needed him to necessarily give us details on that one, but it was good to have the confirmation. And he was talking about calling protesters monkeys. He was talking about the black ones, of course. This is the guy who Gov Abbott could not wait to give a pardon to. And it was the white supremacists getting on code about that one because it was Tucker Carlson who decided to kick that one off. These white supremacists, they wanted to make it very clear. They're going to defend anyone who they see as committing violence in the name of fighting against black people and our demands. If you're going ahead and committing violence in the name of white supremacy, they want to make sure that that's somebody who doesn't get punished. That's the reason why we talked about the mass shooting that Kyle Rittenhouse carried out, and we talked about this murder as well. Because these white supremacists were doing this specifically because they saw some white people who, as far as they were concerned, you're off code. Oh, you're standing against white supremacy? You're over there with the niggers? Well, we need to show you what we do to these nigger lovers. That's the reason why we're talking about it. And for Gov Abbott to specifically decide that he was going to announce to everybody, even before the sentence was handed down, he didn't even know if this guy was even going to prison, but he said, I'm going to pardon this guy regardless. He didn't even know if the guy was going to prison. So what does that tell you? What that tells you is, just like Daniel Perry premeditated the murder that he committed, Gov Abbott also premeditated this act of racist political theater that he was going to pull. Now, why did he do it? White supremacy is fragile. That's why. And due to its inherent weaknesses, it has to remind its beneficiaries that it's still standing, because they are all very much justifiably concerned that white supremacy could fall at any moment. And the system of goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that these white supremacists depend on will go away. They need to be reminded, they need to be reassured that white supremacy is permanent, and it's not in imminent danger of collapse. So whenever that illusion of permanence is broken, say by the law actually prevailing for once, white power has to do something over the top to reassure the beneficiaries that the racial order that they depend on is still intact. What Gov Abbott's doing is the white right doing their virtue signaling. That's what this is. White supremacy absolutely requires impunity in order to exist, and this is particularly true when it comes to the use of violence. White supremacy gained its power through the use of barbaric satanic violence, and that violence was carried out by animals who knew that their savage behavior would carry absolutely no restraints and no consequences either. And that's crucial to the maintenance of a system of oppression. Nobody's going to go along with oppression willingly. They're not going to suffer oppression because they want to. You have to force them to do it. And that takes the form of open violence. And those being oppressed have to know that they can be assaulted or even outright killed with impunity by the oppressors. The white media can tell all the lies they want about law and social norms, but what matters is whether the perpetrators of white supremacist violence are consistently punished and whether that punishment is severe or not. To have severe punishment that only happens sporadically, that's not a system of justice. It's a fluke. And when you have mild punishment, even if it happens frequently, that's not justice either because the perpetrators have not been adequately punished. There's no real consequences for their behavior and no actual deterrent to keep others from acting like them. So this move by Gov Abbott, it proves that even in deepest, darkest, dumbest Texas, these white supremacists understand that they can't depend on these juries to get on code anymore. They can't depend on it. They should never even had to pull something like this. See, the white supremacists, they pride themselves in the idea that they can say, well, no jury convicted. That's just the system, you see. Some white supremacist commits an act of violence, and they either get acquitted or otherwise they get a slap on the wrist. Why? That's the system working the way that it was designed to, the way it's supposed to. But when the white supremacists get punished, now you got Gov Abbott saying, the ability for white man to kill with impunity cannot be infringed upon by a jury or a prosecutor. That's basically what his statement was saying. What he was saying is the white supremacist's right to kill has to be upheld no matter what. Every victory fuels the next victory, and every defeat fuels the next defeat. That's what the white supremacists understand. In this case, this wasn't a victory, however. It was a straight loss. And this is an attempt by the white supremacists to try to erase it after the fact. See, that fiasco with Rittenhouse, they know that was an anomaly. The situation with Perry is inevitably going to become the norm. And this was their attempt to try to give the middle finger to these juries because they know they can no longer count on them. They know that public opinion is against them. They know that the Daniel Perrys, whenever these guys commit their crimes, they're going to be held accountable. Not all the time, but a hell of a lot more than they have been. And that's going to give these white supremacists pause. And how are you going to maintain a system of racial oppression without the use of unrestrained, unpunished violence? The answer, you can't. But understand that these white supremacist politicians, they're going to try to circumvent justice directly now. They can't depend on juries to throw the case for them, and they can't depend on prosecutors anymore to come back and say, well, don't worry, we'll bury this to the grand jury. They can't depend on their usual bag of tricks that makes it where they don't have to get their own hands dirty. Now they're going to have to do it directly, and by doing so, they make targets of themselves in the eyes of the voters. I've been saying this for several years now. Expect to start seeing more of these race killers asking for bench trials. For those who don't know, a bench trial means that a defendant decides to waive their right to a jury, and instead they have the judge act as both judge and jury in their case. It's basically a jury of one. And they do this mess because bench trials, especially for these white supremacists, the judges are notoriously sympathetic to these killers. That's the reason why a number of them opt for a bench trial. This worked for Drew Clinton. That teenage creep, he raped a woman. Everybody knew it. There was no doubt that he had done the crime. So he asked for a bench trial, and the judge boldly ignored the victim. He just minimized that violent rape. And he said, well, this guy over here, Drew Clinton, he's been through enough already. He gave absolutely no consideration to the victim whatsoever, and that was deliberate. See, these judges are also politicians themselves in many cases. And just for the record, although Aaron Persky, the judge in the Brock Turner trial, was successfully recalled by California voters, the judge in the Drew Clinton trial ran for re-election after his scandal, and he won. The only reason that he was removed was because of a state bar disciplinary hearing. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. Okay, now why did that wrinkled up racist down in Texas pull this stunt? First of all, he's been doing stuff like this for years. This is the most brazen stunt that he's pulled, but it's hardly the only one. And second of all, from his perspective, there's no downside to doing so. As I've been telling you for the longest time, when you look at these right-wing racist governors like Rick Snyder in Michigan, who presided over the Flint water crisis, or moron DeSantis, or that clown down in Louisiana, or Gov Abbott, these morons all do this performative extremism because they think that it's a quick and easy road to raise their profile and show the white racist voters that these guys should be in the presidency because they're willing to do the most to uphold white supremacy and ignore the law. Ron DeSantis made that his entire brand, and he also made a fool of himself when he launched a culture war and then became a national laughingstock because he lost his own culture war. See, they thought that they had a surefire path to the White House. That's why they were doing all of this anti-black posturing. And all of them found out the hard way that their racist stunts were the end of their political careers. Greg Abbott realizes this too. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong, that moron, he had all sorts of delusions in that empty head of his that he was going to make it to the White House somehow. But he realizes, just like Ron DeSantis, no, there's no White House in your future. The only way you're getting into the White House is like everybody else with a visitor's pass. Greg Abbott's not worried about the voters retaliating against him because he already knows he's at the end of the road politically already. There's nowhere else for him to go, just like DeSantis. He can't run for the Senate because Ted Cruz and some other idiot already have the 2 Senate seats locked up, and neither one of them has any plans on resigning anytime soon. If Greg Abbott's going to do anything to show his contempt for black people, he might as well do it now because he's not going to have a chance to do it in the future. That's how he sees it. There's no downside here because what are they going to do? The voters are going to vote him out of office? Are they going to end his political career? It's already over. He's at the end of the road. They've seen their asinine message legislation like the Stop Woke Act get struck down by the courts. Their asinine attempts to claim that they can regulate Twitter with state law, that also got laughed out. Their abortion laws have been struck down by ballot initiatives. Even in Florida, there was a ballot initiative to give felons back their right to vote. And it was the Republicans, joined by Democrats, by the way, who put those felon voter restriction laws on the books as a way to circumvent the 15th Amendment. After the Civil Rights Movement went ahead and had the Voting Rights Act passed, they were like, okay, we got to do something else here to try to make it where black people are not going to be able to vote. So what happened was, down there in Florida, even though Florida's Republican state legislature said, nah, we are using these felon voter laws as a way to mass disenfranchise black voters, it was the voters of the state who said, you know what, we're getting rid of that. When these white Republicans see this, it terrifies them because it shows their own voters aren't with them, not to the extent they need them to be. That's being off-code in a massive way. Were it not for the hyper-gerrymandering that Republicans do with these voter districts, they wouldn't control half of these state legislatures that they've got. Now, where are the Democrats while all this is going on? They're sitting back, letting this continue. Why don't they do anything about it? Why don't they start retaliating legislatively through laws of their own? Why don't they start fielding candidates who are getting out there doing the most to show that they're going to stop these racist GOP con men? Why don't they do that? Well, the Democrats aren't doing anything because for them, the Republicans' performative extremism serves a very important purpose. It gives Democrats a way to tell their own voters, you people have to vote for us no matter what, and you better not demand anything because if we don't win, why, those mean old Republicans, they're going to be in office and then they'll pass all these laws to target you. So you better get to the polls and vote for us. And remember, you better not demand anything. It's too dangerous. That's how they get the voters to vote for them without getting anything in return. That's the point. But that game only works if the GOP is there in office and able to pose a clear and extreme threat. Because in circumstances where the Democrats don't have some big bad Republican threat to point to, Democratic voters in general and black Democratic voters in specific start focusing on making demands, things that actually require the system to give up some of its power. And the Democrats are not going to have that. Both political parties have much the same goals. They definitely have the same donors and backers. And when it comes to black people, they're on the same side. This is about maintaining continuity of policy, a violent anti-black policy. So that's the reason why this happened. And I don't think it's going to be the last one like it, but it does go to show the white supremacists understand that their power is beginning to break. Even among white people who they've been looking at and saying, oh, you guys are going to be on code, right? Well, you can't be sure of it. And if the white supremacists can't be sure of the white person next to them being on code, then what happens is they got to start doubting a lot of things. And that essential solidarity that the white supremacists depend on, not just with the white supremacists themselves, but also with the white population in general, that is an absolute requisite in order for white supremacy to continue to exist. Whenever that white solidarity has broken, so has white supremacy's power. 150 years ago, it broke with the Civil War. Then it broke 55 years ago with the Civil Rights Movement. And now the white supremacists are looking and going, they see serious stress fractures and cracks forming again. There's a reason why these white supremacists make it a point to make sure that people like Kyle Rittenhouse and this Daniel Perry character are given free passes to kill, especially if they're killing white people. That's meant to send a message to everyone who's classified as white that if you call yourself getting off code, well, they're going to make sure that you get killed and that the killer doesn't get punished. That's what it's meant to say. Hopefully it'll act as a deterrent, they hope. Hopefully enough white people will be intimidated that they won't have to worry about that white solidarity fracturing. Without that white internal unity, there's no way that they can maintain white external control. Nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. That's something that the slowcoast who just can't understand why it is that the black media comments on cases like this, even though neither the killer nor the victim are black, there's a reason why we comment on it anyway, because we're the reason why these fights keep happening. If you don't recognize a proxy kill or a proxy killer when you see one, then you're just too dim to be in a place like this. So that's what's going on here. We have the Democrats intentionally allowing these crimes to occur because it's politically useful to them. I recommend that everybody adjust to the reality of what's happening here. These white supremacist politicians are getting bold about the fact that if they can't count on juries to let these killers walk, then they'll just do it themselves. That's the reason why being prepared to defend yourself is so important. That way, the next time some sawed-off white supremacist decides that they're going to go to the next protest rally with a gun looking for someone to kill, you'll be able to ensure your safety and make certain that if anyone does get harmed, it's not going to be you. And somehow, I don't think Gov Abbott will be so gung-ho about stand your ground and giving pardons for that. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Kari Brasher, Tomorrow Boyd, Aaron Ray, Antoinette Bird, and Sean. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.